So today I want to yak at you for a few minutes about the idea some of us internalize that fitness and exercise isn't for us because we're not the kind of person who needs it, or we're not the kind of person who's good at things like this, that we're not good at sports, that we're not good at exercise or fitness. Because that was me, and I'll give you some ideas about how I made that decision about myself and then how I changed. So come join me in the park on one of their nice stone benches on this beautiful, if rather hot and humid morning. These here are just reading glasses, and I don't actually need them for most things because I had laser surgery back about 15 years ago and corrected my vision to pretty much 20/20. In the fall of the year when I started second grade, so I would have been 7 years old, I was diagnosed with myopia and got my first pair of glasses. And I remember the approximate time in the fall of that year because my parents took me to a college football game either the same day that I got those glasses or within a couple of days, because I remember sitting in the bleachers struggling with some eye strain and feeling a little bit of a headache as I got adapted to this new situation. And I bring this up because I suspect that my nearsightedness had set in considerably before that. It was discovered towards the beginning of second grade, but I'm guessing that it was a factor in my first grade experience, and possibly even earlier than that. It's just that I must have been sitting somewhere in the classroom where I couldn't quite see the board clearly, and I presume that a teacher alerted my parents to the fact that I was having trouble. I don't recall the details. But here's why I bring this up. In first grade, I developed the idea that I wasn't any good at sports. What convinced me of this was a couple of different things. One was that I kept getting picked last for gym class when we had that in first grade, and I probably just assumed that the other kids knew better than I did and were picking me last because I was bad. But also, when we would go out to recess and play kickball, a sport that I don't even remember how it's played, but it was an important thing that we did a lot, I was terrible. When I say that I was terrible at kickball, what I mean is things like they would, I guess pitch the ball towards somebody. It must have been a little bit like baseball, and you were supposed to kick it, and then people would run around and field it and then try to tag you. And I couldn't time my kicks properly. Now, that isn't necessarily a nearsightedness problem. It could just have been a timing and coordination issue. But in retrospect, I wonder if I just was mistiming, partly because I wasn't appropriately seeing exactly what was going on. The thing about self-judgments like, oh, I'm bad at sports, is that people don't necessarily know that you're coming to that conclusion about yourself. Or people will help you make that decision about yourself by telling you that it's true. But what I also recall about gym classes in those days is that there was a fairly high emphasis on team sports rather than individual instruction. And this makes perfect sense if you're in a public school environment where you have 20, 25, 30 kids in a class to manage. Individual instruction is going to be hard to come by. But when there were individualized activities, a lot of kids already sort of knew what they were doing well enough. And for whatever reasons, either those kids got more attention or asked for more attention, or just didn't need whatever I might have needed to potentially build my skills. Fundamentally, the group instruction that I was part of just didn't suit my developing needs at that time. And it's not that there's a right or wrong answer about that when you're responsible for so many 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds. It's just that I didn't get what I needed. And I internalized every single message one could possibly have been picking up from the ether about how that was an individual problem of mine. What I find about a lot of adults in midlife who don't have some kind of fitness or exercise program is that a lot of us got similar messaging and internalized similar messages at some point in our lives. None of the activities that were prescribed for us fit us, and perhaps the culture around sports just turned us off. But if we step back and look at sports or exercise or fitness from a 50,000 foot level, all sports really are codified and rule-based ways of telling you how to move your body in space and potentially interact with objects or other people moving through space around you. And that's deliberately general because at some level, that's all it is. You're moving your limbs and you're accomplishing something by moving your limbs. You might be a gymnast and doing cartwheels across the floor. You might be swinging from parallel bars. You might be pitching a baseball. You might be hitting a golf ball with a club. You might be boxing with somebody else and having to anticipate and react to their movements. All it is bodies in motion. And at that level, we're doing sports all the time. We just don't call it that. Walking is a sport. Chopping vegetables, if you do that for your evening meal, that's a sport. It's just a skill. It's a way of moving your body to get to a particular goal. Some goals are more practical and others are more just for fun, but that's all it is. As someone with perfectionistic tendencies who was raised by people with perfectionistic tendencies, in some ways the big transition I made in midlife, even before I started working on fitness specifically, was realizing that I could just start from where I was and improve rather than measuring myself against some kind of external standard. Okay, I'm 6'3", maybe I'll never be any good at basketball. On the times when I was younger, when I tried it, I didn't seem to have the skill or the interest. But the field of possible activities is gigantic, and even if we're not taught about all of that from the outset, we can learn our way into it. And because life itself ends up being a sport, it ends up being really useful to coax ourselves into that kind of mindset about, look, this is what I can do, or this is what I want to do. How can I find ways of making that enjoyable and pleasurable so that in the future I continue to have these capabilities? It doesn't require teams. It doesn't require specific activities. But there are general things about the body that need regular maintenance and care. Different muscles, different joints, they can do certain things, they can't do others, and the more we practice those things that they can do, the more we keep those capabilities. If you're a person like me who internalized these ideas about what sports are, what fitness is, and why we're not the kind of person who does that, because we don't want to be some kind of toxic bro, because exercise that we were given to do always felt awkward and painful for us, or just annoying. I get all of that, but I encourage you to see if thinking about this more broadly helps you find your own way into it, because all of us have bodies. And even though not all of us can move them in the same ways, you could be a 6-year-old who can't time your kicks appropriately, and you may never be able to change that. There's still probably something that you can do.